My pleasure next is to introduce Ryan Polley. Ryan is the Vice President of Corporate Development at ComScore. Please join me in welcoming him.
Hi, everyone. So I am the Vice President of Corporate Development at ComScore. About a year and a half ago, I joined ComScore through an acquisition that ComScore made when they acquired my former company, AdExpose, where I was the Chief Operating Officer. And I've spent the majority of my career in the software business, primarily ad technologies. So today I want to talk about some of the nuances related to ad technologies and how data is being used, and in the concept of buying and selling guaranteed viewable audiences. So let's look at where we've come from. This smartphone in 1985 would have been the largest computer in the world. By the end of 2012, ComScore will have processed, at the end of 2012, we had processed in just the month of December 1.4 trillion digital interactions per month. It's a lot of volume for one company. And 92% of the world's data was created in just the past 2 years. The price continues to go down, but at last I checked, $600 would be enough disk space to store the entire world's music library. So let's look a little further into how this is impacting, this technology change is impacting the advertising industry, and specifically components of it that are really tied to buying audiences. So 3% growth, I believe, overall for ad spending in Q3, and digital continued to outpace that significantly at 18% year over year. Digital measurements changing. Of course, we're all very aware of that. And ComScore has been participating with the 3MS. We have a tool, VCE. We were recently accredited by the MRC for the viewability metric. And the MRC is very focused on providing that accreditation for 3MS tool providers. One of the components of the 3MS is moving from a served ad impression to a viewed ad impression. We did a charter study almost a year ago where we looked at viewability across a number of different placements, and the data was pretty interesting. We recognized that 30% of impressions are not viewed by the end user. Fairly significant amount of impressions. The other key trend that we're all very aware of is the buying process is moving from location, say buying a specific site, to buying audiences. And the primary means of doing that is happening in these RTB environments. Not all RTB environments are created equal, and not all data assets are created equal. That said, it's clearly a very positive trend for the industry, and today there are multiple sources suggesting that at least 20% of impressions are being traded through RTB environments. So what are the steps that have kind of taken place to move to a world where we eventually will be able to buy guaranteed viewable impressions and audiences? This certification process, 3MS, was formed by the ANA, the 4As, and the IAB. The industry bodies got together and put together this project called Making Measurement Make Sense, which had a number of initiatives related to simplifying the metrics we use. The viewable impression was a big part of that. There are a number of challenges when you look at this concept of buying audiences. I think we're all fairly aware of what a cookie is, I'm sure. A cookie is a browser session, and it stores that data for that browser. If I perhaps am at work and then I go home, unless there's some way to connect those dots, and I'm on multiple computers, that session may not be connected, so I may be counted multiple times. There's also cookie deletion, And not all data assets are equal. So some providers of data in the cookie form have a much deeper set of information than others do. And so when you're buying audiences, a lot of the effectiveness of that can vary depending on which audience set you're using to buy that information. ComScore conducted some research on its own to try to understand how effective cookie buying in general or audiences using cookies could be. And when we looked at the data, it was pretty interesting. 70% of the impressions were accurately targeting the right attribute when you only had one attribute, let's say males. So in the case of that, 70% of the impressions, you were accurately reaching the target audience. When you added a secondary attribute, say males 18 to 34, it dropped to 48%. And then when you added a third attribute, males 18 to 34 with kids, it dropped even further to 11%. And then when you add on top of that, that some fairly significant, maybe as many as 30%, maybe in other cases, depending on where you're buying, a large percent of the impressions weren't seen, you're limited to a fairly small effectiveness when you're only using cookies. But that's not always the case. There are certainly cases where it's very effective. And again, it comes back to the data sets that you're using. ComScore measures audiences and viewability through a product called Validated Campaign Essentials. In our product, we use really three components that drive our means of measuring. So we have our million-person panel in the US, a million-person panel outside of the US. We're measuring people there. We also are tagged on 90% of the top media properties worldwide, and we're using that data. And then we have third-party data partners, which is cookie data. And we take that to project and define and then validate those audiences. The secondary challenge related to measuring these audiences and buying and selling is not only a technical challenge, but it's also a business challenge. Some of the definitions vary significantly. So viewability is emerging as a means of buying, yet some platforms don't necessarily allow for buying viewable impressions. There can be challenges in that, and there are a number of reasons why. Above the fold and below the fold is not the same thing as viewability. Viewability's definition is related to the ad rendering in the browser area and being viewable, regardless of where it is on the page. The end user has the opportunity to actually see it. Above the fold and below the fold, pretty straightforward. The user may have come to a page, they may scroll down immediately to the bottom of the page, but if the ad's above the fold and it renders and there's an impression counted, the user didn't have an opportunity to see it, but you bought an above the fold ad placement. There's also the question of what does guaranteed mean, and we can dive a little more into that in a few minutes. The third is, and what we want is pre-crime. We're getting there. This is a reference to Minority Report. But in the ad business, we'd ideally want to be able to know what audience we're buying before we buy it, and we'd ideally want to know that that impression will be viewable. There are some challenges, especially in the RTB environment, where certain data may or may not be passable back to the bidder before the bid is made. So, for example, to understand the historic information around the viewability of an ad placement, you'd need to know the specific URL and the placement on that page. You'd have to have a database of all of that information historically, so you could look at what was the historic viewability rate, and then based on that, you could set a threshold of acceptability and bid based on that. The platforms that exist today, they vary. Not all of them necessarily have the capacity or are sharing the information at the URL and the placement level. Therefore, most of them have it at the domain level, and if it's only at the domain level, you can only be accurate to the domain level. So you'd use historical data to project viewability rates, but only at the domain level. That's probably not the depth of information you'd want to have greater efficiency when buying media in that form. So the practical state of the market is, I've seen and heard and talked to a number of both platforms, publishers, agencies, advertisers. And there have been RFPs that have gone out asking for guaranteed viewable audiences. For a publisher or for a platform or for a network, especially in an RTB environment, that is a challenge that is yet to be met by the industry and by the tools providers, as well as by the companies that would love to be able to deliver against that. And that challenge is because of the items that I noted. There are technical limitations, both of the tools providers as well as of the platforms, to be able to deliver a guaranteed viewable audience. You're dealing with different data sets in how you're validating versus the data sets you're buying against. So there'll be nuances there. So we can't deny that there are these challenges, and we have to focus on getting to a place where we solve for them. ComScore, again, has been very focused over the last 12 months especially on bridging this gap in as many ways as we possibly can. With our launch of VCE, we've made good progress. We did the charter study. We've brought new data to market. We're working with 3MS. We're now accredited for the viewable impression. And we've launched the video VCE. Now, that's a limited tool. It only works with certain platforms, and we're working with a number of platforms to expand that. But going out to market and being able to buy video viewability today or video audiences today that are guaranteed and viewable is a challenge, and it's a challenge in the marketplace that we're up for. So we're up for the challenge. We've also launched Mediametrics multi-platform. We want to measure audiences across digital, so understanding audiences across every device and being able to measure the unique audience across device. So in the future, we will have that pre-crime solution, and it'll take the entire industry to get there. Interoperability between tools and data sets will be critical. The key message I want to leave the group with today is that there are limitations to the tools. There are different data sets that have different levels of accuracy. And I think it's really important that as buyers and sellers, we all operate off of the same kind of definitions so that we know when we're going in and you're trying to buy, say, a guaranteed viewable audience, that the definition of what that is critically important. And that you have knowledge of the nuances of both the technologies, but also the tools that exist in the marketplace. That's it.
Thank you, Ryan. Viewed versus served ad impressions. That's a good one. Having the right depth of information, the challenge of guaranteed audiences. $600 to store the world's music library. Why does my iPad cost that much? That's really interesting if that's a true one.